Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance by voices within the independent Catholic movement. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. And now, meet your hosts, Reverend Dr. Trish Sullivan-Bonney and Reverend Dr. Jayme Matthias.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And I'm Reverend Trish Sullivan-Bonney.
And for this episode, we have a very special guest, Reverend Trish.
I am really delighted to welcome to the podcast Father Ricky Manalo. Ricky is a cherished friend and an amazing voice in the Roman Catholic world, the world I like to call our family of origin. So I follow people like him very closely. He's currently leading a project called the Communion Project. I think we may want to get him back on this podcast to talk a little bit about that. He is the founder of CatholicFaithAI.org. He has written a book that's about to come out by through Liturgical Press up in Collegeville, Minnesota, called the Catholic Handbook on AI. Many of us know him intimately through his amazing composition work. Although we have been listening carefully to him as he leads around questions of technology, he's also an incredibly gifted composer, lyricist, pianist. He studied at the Manhattan School of Music, attended the Washington Theological Union, where he did his studies as a Paulist priest, which he is. And I know him from his years at the Graduate Theological Union, where we were both working on our PhDs. His was accomplished in liturgy and culture, a never separable duo from the time of the founding of the church. So he holds a doctorate in liturgy and the sociology of religion, lives in Midtown Manhattan, my old stomping ground from when I was a consultant, many a day over on Fifth Avenue, going to various conferences with the Paulist at their mother house. And I'm super excited to welcome you, Ricky. I really am tempted to tell everybody you're a Jersey guy too, because, you know, that really is the lead quality that you and I both like manifest. Anything I forgot? What else would you want the folks to know about you before we jump in?
Oh, no, that's very gracious already, the introduction you gave, Trish. Thanks so much. It is great to see you and you too, Jayme. It's an honor to be here, to be part of your podcast. And just good memories when I presented to your community. Was that last year or 2 years ago? I'm already losing track.
Yeah, it was 2 years ago at our synod, and you absolutely blew the lids off of our ecumenical Catholic communion attendees. And I won't digress into some of what you presented to us on what AI was capable of, but it was an enormous moment of the lights going on for me. And I thought I was somebody who was really on top of technology and technological development. Jayme and I are also indebted to you because you might recall you came and talked to us at the beginning of COVID when all of our small churches, not under diocese and other, jurisprudence, were struggling to figure out what are we going to do. And that conversation was also incredibly memorable. So thank you for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to this.
So I was struck, we put you on the calendar a couple of weeks ago, as you know, and then in our, in very recent weeks, we had the issuing of the Pope Leo's new encyclical on technology and artificial intelligence. And I have to say, we have some liturgical flexibility in the ecumenical Catholic communion, and I have started adding the name of the Bishop of Rome, Leo, to our consecration, because I think that what Pope Leo is doing for the world is, and certainly for the Christian community, is absolutely phenomenal, incredibly timely, and very, very needed, as we saw here in the U.S. when, tech bullies went into our government and started, mining out data and doing the things they've done. And, these tools are absolutely flabbergasting, and they are also on some level really alarming. So I want to start maybe at the beginning in terms of, you've been talking about AI before. A lot of us in the churchy settings were doing that. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how it got your attention as a liturgist and composer and all the world of things that I knew you for, but you were also really staying on top of culture and what was happening. So give us a little flavor of how your intellectual engagement with the question of the place of AI began.
Oh, great question. Thanks. I'm doing some self-reflecting now. It seems that you mentioned Berkeley when we were both studying there at Graduate Theological Union. During that time, during my studies, I was taking these courses at UC Berkeley. One of the great things you can do when you go to GTU is you can take all of the courses you want, depending on how much time you have. I took courses in sociology of culture, and that got me really focused on anything that's going on, as we would say from Vatican II, the signs of the times. It gave me the tools. And so after I graduated there, when there were things going on in the world or in our country, for example, live stream mass, that was something interesting, or the nuns, NONES, disaffiliation, or AI. Things like that. I've always wanted to say, well, now I have some academic tools to be able to study that area, and then always ask myself, how does it apply to pastoral ministry? In the end, I'm a pastoral theologian. I'm always saying that's really nice, whether it's a statement or whether it's even an academic book, but how does that actually apply? And so maybe about 4 years ago, I was invited to give a talk at Gonzaga University on AI in preaching. It's maybe about 3.5 years ago, after ChatGPT 3.5 came out, right? November 2022. If you recall, that's when all of a sudden AI, they had 1 million subscribers within the first few weeks. And so that kind of put AI in our sort of contemporary mindset right now. And basically because of my passion of understanding what's going on. I thought back then that AI was going to be even more ubiquitous, and of course I'm correct. It was, and a lot of other people, including the Pope, kind of saw this as something that we're going to have to really take a deeper dive into it because of its power, because of its, as you mentioned, it's how it could be used. Like it has, as much as it has many promises, it also has perils. So that led to then ultimately about 2 years ago, I was actually invited to the Vatican to be part of a panel discussion there. It was a gathering for, we call ourselves BAIF, which is an awful name, but Builders of AI Forum. It was 70 of us, half of whom are the actual developers, or people who are in institutions like MIT, Microsoft. All these people were there. I was one of the few theologians, and I was part of a panel to talk about what prophetic role can the Catholic Church play in an age of AI. And that kind of course, I got introduced to other experts that's going on. I began to see what the Vatican has been doing. It's actually been a 10-year process for them. This encyclical didn't come out of thin air. They've always been in dialogue with developers, philosophers, and ethicists with regard to AI. So that's a foundation, and then since then I've been doing some writing on it, giving a lot of talks going around the country, giving practical, demonstrations, giving a history, and ultimately this book I'm writing. By the way, it's not going to be published for a few months, but I thought it'd be timely to come up with a Catholic Handbook on AI.
Father Ricky, what a delight to have you here with us today. What fond memories of meeting you when we were both young conventual Franciscan friars. You were at Ellicott City, Maryland at the time. And I just have these rich memories over the years. During my solemn profession and during my ordination to the priesthood, for instance, we sang your song, The God of All Grace, which I just absolutely love for especially what I consider the Renarian theology that fills that song. So what a delight to have you with us. And I also want to say before I ask my my first question. First of all, happy anniversary. You and our friend Ernie Aguilar were ordained about 9.5 months before I was. So it's sort of like it's fun to be able to almost compare notes, if you will, on our journeys through the year. So what a delight to have you here. I want to tell you, Father Ricky, because I told AI this morning that we would be interviewing you for this podcast, and I wanted to share with you what it is that AI said in response. ChatGPT says, Ricky Manalo is such a rich guest for Cutting Edge Catholics because he stands at the intersection of liturgy, spirituality, pastoral ministry, culture, creativity, and now the emerging moral questions surrounding AI. Progressive Catholics would likely love hearing not merely technical analysis, but a deeply human and spiritual conversation about what AI means for worship, art, community, and human dignity. I did not write those words, but I think they're absolutely brilliant, Father Ricky. And so I just want to ask you, in light of yesterday's announcement of Leo's encyclical on artificial intelligence, I'm writing on it in my daily Substack tomorrow because I think it's just so brilliant, especially for its centering on the human person rather than on so many other issues, whether it's the technology, whether it's the corporate profits or other things that are out there. I think there's a lot that our theological tradition can bring to this conversation. And so I just want to turn it to you and ask you, as you start reflecting on Leo's words, having been to the Vatican and having been consulted on issues of artificial intelligence, what might our listeners benefit from knowing about this document and the process that went into it?
Well, I did if this is believable, I did a quick read of it. It's like I forgot, it's like 150 pages or something like that. It's really long. It's larger than Pope Francis's Laudato Si, which talked about ecology. In case people don't know, I thought it's a brilliantly written encyclical, all in all, quite expansive, and great construction, great architecture to it, kind of situating, the Catholic Church's thoughts. It's not necessarily saying AI is evil. It can't make any kind of a judgment. Any technology could be both good or bad, depending how we use it. But it's at a critical time in our country and in our world, because right now in our world, most people, I kind of explain this in my book. I hate to generalize, but there seems to be, as a starting point, like three groups of people of how they approach AI today. You have the optimists. There are those people who are all gung-ho, and they talk about how AI was actually going to bring a lot of great achievements, and it will, leading to human flourishing. We're already seeing that in medicine, what it's doing to radiology, for example. There are AI, tools that could do a better job in scanning X-rays in the human eye. A lot of other areas are going to increase. Even all the different areas of education, for example, it might democratize. Maybe there are people in different parts of the world who can't afford to have access to good education. Eventually, we're going to have a setting where every individual student will be able to have her or his own tutor. It might be robotic, But as I say all that, of course, you have also the reactionaries to that, right? Because someone say, well, wait a minute, it could lead to that. But then you also have then the critiques, and the ones who are saying, well, yeah, we have to ultimately get to that like any technology, but at what cost, right? At what cost to humanity? For example, do we want robots to be the sole instructors of our education system? Whatever. How do we keep the human in the loop, per se? And a lot of them are talking about, other areas that they're already beginning to see, how it's costing the environment, ecological damage in order to have, these data centers, in order to energize and have those resources. So they're kind of seeing the opposite, and they're calling out these industries, and there are like maybe about 7 main ones. That's another thing Pope Leo has been talking about, that all this power, is being limited to these major industries. And the third group I want to say are people in the middle who are saying, well, we have to be realistic. We can't we can't say stop AI progression. We have to be able to, of course, pursue it, because ultimately it will be able to alleviate a lot of these difficulties. But perhaps we can pause it for a moment. And this group is saying, well, wait a minute, maybe as we pursue it, let's get our act together. Let's make sure we don't have to hold hands 100%, but let's make sure that some of these areas right now, the ethical, moral issues, we could at least have some grasp, because it's accelerating so fast. So let me bring this back to Pope Leo. He's bringing this encyclical exactly at this juncture when it's needed. We haven't had really any sense of governance coming out that's going to regulate the corporate developers who have all that power and have various incentives, including ethical. I don't want to say that they're dismissive of that either, but they also have other incentives. Pope Leo is coming out at a time when we might need some moral guidelines, some moral frameworks before we pursue it too quickly. And I think that's going to be the wonderful achievement of what this encyclical does, because in the end, I think a lot of people are going to refer back to it, just like I kept referring back to Laudato Si when it came to ecological, consciousness. So I think that would be probably its biggest value.
Father Ricky, one of the things I love about this encyclical too is simply how it is that he begins by recalling his predecessor, Leo XIII. In the introduction to this document, Leo XIII, we know, had this foundational work in Catholic social teaching called Rerum Novarum, New Things. And so for him to be talking about this new thing, this new technology in our world, I guess my question for you, Father Ricky, is this. The Roman Catholic Church is not famous for turning on a dime and or on responding to issues quickly as they arise. I'm remembering as a young seminarian in the early 1990s, John Paul II suggesting that maybe the Roman Catholic Church was wrong about its condemnation of Galileo centuries before. So any insights into how it is that it just strikes me that there's something very timely about him talking about this new thing in the way that Leo XIII was talking about Rerum Novarum, new things back in that era. Does this signal anything that's happening within the Catholic Church large about its response to current issues, contemporary events?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. When you think about our history with science and faith, right? You can say, the chapter of Galileo, we go, well, yeah, we were probably wrong. But the quick answer I would say, and I don't mean this to be a scapegoat, but obviously Vatican II, when that came out, and the line about how do we read the signs of the times and be open to the modern world and what's going on. Since Vatican II, there's always been this ongoing thread of technology and faith. In fact, even one of the earlier decrees in Vatican II was on communication, and faith. That led to, over the years, various statements. For example, one on the internet. There was another one, and the name I forget. It came out about 2 years ago, and it was all about social media, and how, the pros and cons, mostly the cons, because after more substantial 10-year study, if you know about Jonathan Haidt's, the anxious generation, it kind of coincided around that publication of his own sociological study. So I think since Vatican II, we've really gotten better of at least reading what was going on when it came to particular issues in the social sciences. Having said that, of course, it's very particular to the particular papacy. Obviously, Pope Francis and now Pope Leo, who's going to continue that, I think are going to be much more attentive to those signs of the times. Whereas the previous Pope, maybe not as much. They had other areas they were looking at, what Pope Benedict did to our liturgy with the translation. Obviously he had a different, and for whatever reason, he was looking at that area. But I'm kind of very hopeful with Pope Leo now kind of taking the baton from Pope Francis.
I think many of us are finding Pope Leo's voice credible, critical, Um, I have really come to see Pope Leo in recent months, particularly as he challenges the United States indirectly, because all he is doing is teaching the faithful the faith of the church. But it's coming up against a very different understanding of Christianity at times. I have found him, I think we're deeply indebted to him in terms of what he's done in the bully pulpit of the papacy, but now with this encyclical particularly. I was interested to as you shared that this is been long in the works, and it's very striking to me that it's the two popes from the Americas that have been willing to kind of engage this level of contemporary society. Inter Mirifica, which is that document on communication in Vatican II, is often forgotten.
Yeah.
And that was really its own little landmark in terms of seeing that even things like television and radio and movies were changing the world. So, and you mentioned Rerum Novarum, this trajectory of the dignity of the human person
Yes.
being central to a Christian life and Christian understanding of how to relate to the world. It's an ancient idea that really has gotten articulated after the Industrial Revolution on, as we really began to brutalize humanity. Back in the with labor in particular. So I'm wondering, what your thoughts are about. I have not read the entire document. I kind of scanned it. But he talks at one point about concentration of power and human dignity, and the idea that some of these tools are bringing, staggering wealth and staggering power into the hands of a few and are not necessarily at service to the greater good and the greater community on critical issues that he's concerned about, like poverty and access to all the different things that make quality of life, beautiful and wonderful. I'm just wondering what your reaction was to that.
Yeah, I think it's being real, in many ways. In the United States, as distinct from China, and I could talk about that if you remind me, but in the United States, right now, most of the companies and developers are focused on AGI, artificial general intelligence. Now, if you don't know what that is, maybe the viewers may not. Basically, it's going to take what we know right now, generative AI with ChatGPT and Claude, to the next level. It's going to take it to a point where, if you can imagine, we're already experiencing this. You can imagine a particular machine, whether it's a robot or your own computer, that has, that kind of expands beyond all human knowledge and is able to have, like, I'm able to consult or do tasks of people, let's say, who have 1,000 doctorate degrees, like ourselves, let's say. Because the first person who has that, for good and for ill, they'll be able to then always be ahead of every other company or every other country. They'll always have the lead, because then those AI machines will always be able to improve themselves without humans in the loop. And Pope Leo kind of talks about these issues. So coming back to your question, what Pope Leo is doing, he's saying that power is really relegated to these particular companies, these particular developers. But certainly the US government hasn't come out with any kind of, guidelines or guardrails. There's no global holding hands. Let's get our act together before we pursue these various incentives and all these, other hidden or not so hidden agendas, let's say. And so that's what I think he's doing. He's saying that's not right, and it really isn't. And there's an imbalance there, obviously. So what he's trying to do is trying to say, how might all of us do a better job of creating alliances, collaborations, the whole, and he's taking this in a very deeper anthropological context, the whole humanity should be a part of this, particularly those who are most vulnerable, particularly those, echoing back to Pope Francis and Laudato Si', those countries who are going to be left behind. For example, while we are reaping the benefits of AI, there are some countries who are still trying to get them laptops. What's going to happen when all these powerful nations, China, United States, are going to accelerate? Once they get AGI, then they're going to boom forward even faster. Are we going to think about these other cultures, nations? What about job, displacement? Yes, one day we might achieve human flourishing when most of us will not be able to have jobs. But in the Philippines, for example, there are about 1.5 to 2 million call center agents. On an airline, you might get someone from the Philippines. Chances are they're going to be replaced. Is Microsoft or Tesla going to pay those 1.5 to 2 million people who are raising families or trying to find a sustainable lifestyle? Well, before we get to that stage, these are the questions that we have to ask globally, because we're all connected, and it's all going to somehow come around, actually, because that's the kind of world we live in. So that's just one issue. I could talk about warfare and health and all of that, but you're getting the idea. This is a global issue, and it ought to be a global responsibility, not down to 7 or 12.
Father Ricky, I'm wondering if you might address the issue of AI and creativity. That is, as a priest, artist, and liturgical composer, I'm wondering if you worry about how it is that AI might be commodifying or cheapening human creativity and human expression. I'll use an example. Here within our movement, we have many people who like putting their works online. And I recently saw a homily by a priest in our movement, and I said to myself, that was written by AI. And so he read this homily, which to me was apparently written by AI. But I was also thinking to myself, it is much better than other things I've heard coming from him. So there's this sort of there's this tension within me, right? And I'm wondering, especially as one who composes music and who creates homilies yourself, if there are any concerns that you have about the artificial imitation of human creativity and of our use of those artificial things when we're addressing God's people.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you brought up the creativity, because I devote one section of my book to artists, of course, but also it connects to any kind of written text or painting or image or all those areas. When I recorded, here's the story. When I recorded my first CD, Beyond the Days, that was like 1997, and I remember the engineer, studio engineer, received. I remember it explicitly. He received a package. And it was the auto tuner. It was the first year it came out. I don't know if you know the auto tuner, but that collection, Beyond the Days, was the first CD that Oregon Catholic Press we used the auto tuner. So what it is, if I could record a cantor, let's say, and then if a cantor was kind of flat in that one note, I just pop it up in the screen, and I could just move the the controls, the sound wave, to make it so that she was pitch perfect, per se. So we began to use it there, and actually it came in very handy. But after the first round, and after listening to it, I said, Mike, it sounds almost too perfect. So we went back again, and we played it, we flattened some of the notes, just a tiny bit. We kind of split the difference, is what we call it, between being too perfect and where it had fallen. And we played it again, and that sounds more natural. Now, that was 1997. So, there's always been this interplay between musicians, artists, and the use of modern technology. It's nothing new, nothing new. Even during my recordings, since with OCP over the decades, I felt like I majored myself. There were times when maybe I brought in a synthesizer, and because we didn't have time or the budget, I would just do string sounds. Well, that left also a string player without a gig, per se. But we had to kind of adjust. And so there was always this, way in and way out. So that's one aspect, partly because when it comes to justice, what new jobs are being created and what new jobs in the world of art, and actually anywhere else, what also new jobs are being displaced in those areas. The other social justice issue, of course, is that I could write with a AI program called Suno, S-U-N-O. I could say, write me, an Advent song for the third Sunday of Advent, make it a communion song. And within 30 seconds, something comes out and it sounds fantastic. And it even gives me 2 sets of lyrics. And there's even a recording with the whole band. Even the band sounds great. The problem is it went into the trillions of other Advent communion songs and kind of pieced those together. So it kind of generated, as opposed to create out of nothing, it kind of generated those various songs together, and those composers aren't getting credit per se. So even if I were to use that and put it in a worship aid or hymnal, I cannot claim that copyright because I don't own the Frankenstein piece, I don't know if that's the right word, that I kind of created myself. So that's that issue. But to go back on the other side, and this is the last thing I want to say, composers have always been, I'm a history of composers like Dan Schutte or composers like Jim Chaponis, or Marty Hagen has definitely, Jim Chaponis, by the way, highly influenced my God of All Grace, but he didn't get a royalty for that. It's up to the editors to kind of decide at what point is it his. I could tell you, like what parts. So we're always influenced, right, by various things. But when it comes to just wages, that's when the legalities and the ethical issues matter.
Yeah, that's so pointed, and we've been struggling with this for really since the emergence of the desktop computer. Because I think about, my time at Dow Jones, where I was the editor of a magazine and the acting publisher of said magazine. And it was the days, okay, I'm going to date myself now, when, everything type was generated and pasted down on boards and whatever. And then once the desktop design became big, suddenly everyone was a designer. And we saw all kinds of terrible design flowing because every amateur under the sun could, use these tools from Adobe and elsewhere. They were not the same as the brilliant Kevin Thompson, who was doing my magazine, right? And he was bemoaning it. It was affecting his business because suddenly you need a logo. And well, now if you need a logo, you can go on any number of AI platforms and say, give me a logo and have it look like this. So I struggle with it. So I'm an adjunct professor of theology at St. Catherine University. And I have been having great angst in that role around AI, because on the one hand, true confessions, I have been known to use AI here and there, not in developing my lectures, I would add. But, here and there when I'm writing things and I need, I remember I was writing my newspaper column and I wanted 4 tight descriptions of how the environment has been impacted in Minnesota in the last 10 years. And that would have taken me hours and hours to find, right? On the other hand, I was practically bald by the end of the semester because of the amount of AI generated content coming over the Canvas platform at the university. So much so that I even had students in their faculty critique fellow students because they were pasting stuff in the chat that was clearly from AI. So AI completely does an end run around learning, right? So if all I need to do is grab Jayme's reflection, throw it in ChatGPT, say, critique this for me, and then I post it, how have I learned, right? I'm just so torn about it. On the one hand, there are aspects of it I love, and on the other, there's, all kinds of problems. So, so I'm wondering, as I scanned the encyclical, I was thinking, really what I think Pope Leo is trying to do is use the lens of Catholic social teaching to look at all of these tools, and particularly AI. And we have a really wonderful body. And really, all of these things have never been neutral, just not neutral.
It's a great
All
event.
technologies, whether it was the steam engine or, ChatGPT. So, any thoughts for those of us who are in the crosshairs? Like, what ethical questions should we be asking ourselves? I mean, you mentioned the whole question of, leaning on James Chaponis's work. What are the ethical questions we need to ask ourselves as we continue to take little baby steps into these tools, whether because they're going to get the answer quick? It's about, for me, it's about it being expeditious, right?
Yeah. Great question. And I feel like, so in my book, the Handbook on AI, the third chapter, I propose 5 discernment frameworks, which is my short answer of what we ought to be doing. We have to, pastorally speaking, give people discernment frameworks. There's going to be both ends, good, bad, whatever approaches, and people, as we know, they're in the spectrum as to not even knowing, let's say, what a generative AI or ChatGPT, to those who are already, like you're saying, using these tools already per se. So those 5, I'll try to be quick. The first one is keeping the human in the loop. I don't use those words, but the idea is, how is it affecting our humanity in all of this? Which is not to say we don't pursue it, but in the meantime, we have to always be careful about, where is the human in the loop? We talked about paper or writing a homily, as Jayme gave an example. At what point does that sense of humanity come in my discernment process when I use the tool? I think that means questioning myself. What's my goal? Is it to guess? Is it about efficiency? Because that's the autocratic paradigm that Pope Francis kind of, critiqued in Laudate Si, that we're getting into this technocratic paradigm. And for those who don't know it, that's when we begin to evaluate the human based solely on efficiency and optimization. Well, Pope Francis says, is that all humans are? And if I'm going to crank out this homily or do something in Canva or homework, is the goal about efficiency, or is there something deeply more human? The other part talks about formation. How are we forming ourselves? Let me get back to the homily. If I do a Sunday Mass homily, I might begin to think about that for about a week, or maybe 6 days. If it's a major event, give me 2 to 3 weeks. And during that time, if it's a daily Mass, I might actually do that just that morning, maybe even an hour before Mass. During that time, I like to wrestle with the angel of Scripture. I like to say, I forgot about 1 Corinthians. Now that's being, alleviated. That formation is all of a sudden accelerated. So what happens to that? It might happen, and this is going to seem like I'm going to the other side, it might happen after the first draft comes out. And then I could do more. Then my humanity and my formational intention might be, let me look at this, not seeing it as a final draft, but let me work with this, and now let me wrestle and find out, and so on. So the formational question is another part of that. The third part is creativity, which I talked about already. How am I using AI tools as a tool to help me come up with new ideas? It might be more efficient, but then I would hope, get into deeper areas or further areas of creativity, which we have yet to see. That's the excitement of AI. It's going to lead to all these innovations. I don't know why I'm forgetting the fourth one, but that has to do with time, basically. And I talk about Sabbath. So one question we could ask ourselves is, it's not interconnected to the other ones in some ways, but with every innovation that you brought up, Trish, we've always been using them, and it ought to be saving us time. You mentioned how what you did saved you hours. The question I would ask you, this is rhetorical, but what did you do with that freer time? And knowing you, I want to probably guess, you probably filled it up with something else, because that's what I did. And when we come back to our Judeo-Christian understanding of Sabbath, time for God, time for prayer, time for exercise, family, friend, you know what I'm saying? And what normally happens, and this is all part of Rerum Novarum, the modern world we wind up filling it up again, back to that autocratic, paradigm. The last frame that I think we ought to be thinking about, and I put this together, the ecological creation, relationship, and I put God in there as well. The idea that how we are relating to one another, care of creation, care of the earth. Pope Leo talks about that because he's always referring back to Pope Francis. And how does that actually even affect our relationship with God, per se? Because we know, we've been reading it in so many different ways, this is going to cost so much money and energy. When I do, and I'll end here, when I do, if I use 10 prompts, and a prompt, if you don't know, is what I write down in a box, what I type down in Google. 10 of those prompts takes about 2 teaspoons of water. Whenever I use any kind of, if you feel the bottom of your laptop, it's warm. Same thing with Google or the data center. It doesn't go to a cloud as if it's ephemeral, no, it actually goes to a center that has to, use water actually to cool it down. If I use 10 prompts for ChatGPT or Claude, that takes 1 liter of water. I mean, my mindset already, sometimes when I use ChatGPT or Claude, I've actually pulled back a bit because I realize the ecological cost every time I do a particular prompt. Sometimes I'll even move beyond the ChatGPT or Claude and just go to Google again if I need to. Not everything has to be AI because that's costing a lot. So things like that, those are the frameworks that we need to kind of be aware of because I think it's going to affect our everyday life.
Father Ricky, I just want to say as a former Franciscan that you just really speak to my heart when you're talking about the ecological impact, the environmental impact that all of this is having on our sister Mother Earth. It's just very moving to hear you say that. I'm wondering, Father Ricky, if I might ask you to see if we might construct a more concrete bridge between AI and liturgy. For yourself as a liturgist and a liturgical composer, I just see great potential in AI for the ways in which future generations of clergy and lay leaders could use AI for the planning and or execution of our liturgies as a church and in different traditions. I'm thinking of ways that it might help to enrich them, in terms of accessibility and inclusion. Right now, one of my projects is I'm using AI tools to help to translate the diaries of a 17th century French nun who I think speaks very poignantly to progressive people of faith today. So I'm wondering, as you think about the future clergy and lay leaders who will be entrusted, who will be given this tradition of the liturgy that generations have handed on to us and that we will hand on to them, if you have any thoughts on the role of AI in the future of liturgy.
Yeah, I actually wrote at the North American Academy of Liturgy. For those who don't know, that's the annual national geeky gathering of liturgists. Trish, I know you've been there. So I presented a paper there 2 years ago about 8 trajectories on AI and liturgy, and to name a few of them, sort of at the base level. You mentioned some of them already, Jayme. Definitely, it will help with some of the planning. I know music directors who helps with the scheduling, makes things more efficient. I know choir directors, it's been going on already, but AI is making it even better. You could have, a choir member could, in a SATB, let's say 4-part harmony, choral piece, there could be ways of singling out with more efficiency, just the tenor line, so that I could go home in between the rehearsals just to hear my own tone or a generated voice. But again, what's the goal? To be able to learn that piece more efficiently and be better prepared. So things like that are going on. Kind of at the next level, when we're getting into a little bit more deeper level, what's going to happen when we have what I call AI embedded worship? That's going to sound kind of provocative. So, kind of, what we might have smartphones now, or even AI glasses are about to come out. They came out before, but didn't do very well. These other media, in other words, ways of intersecting between what worship aids and ourselves would say, there might be a time when we have AI embedded chips within us, for better or for worse, where, let's say, it might be in my earlobe. And when I go to a worship space, I actually, we don't need microphones, because somehow the choir, I hear perfect four-part harmony, depending on the cultural interpretation of what harmony is, within my ears already, per se. So already it's no longer the tactile, close physical proximity, but maybe is there something in the middle that where something, I actually hear every word of the preacher, or I don't speak English. I just came in from Vietnam. I could hear every lector, preacher, presider in my own language by these embedded AI tools. But then going back to my first framework of humanity, where does that end? As far as having more embedded AI technology within us. Medical world is already looking at nanobots, right? The idea of injecting within a bloodstream microscopic AI that's going to cure cancer one day. But then what does it mean to be human? Does it mean if we have 51% nanobot blood that I'm more robot than I'm than I'm human? Then what does that say to liturgical bodies breathing? So those are the questions the more we get deep dive. But on the meantime, there certainly are a lot of tools and practical ways that's going on.
I'm thinking about my very cherished professor of liturgy at St. John's, Father Kevin Seasalt's, OSB, who one of his battle cries was, "We are body people, we are body people." And the whole idea was that liturgy is an embodied reality. It's all of that. And I have already grappled with this as someone who's doing hybrid mass every Sunday, where one cluster of people are having one kind of experience and the same number of people are dialing in and having a different experience. What does it mean to be in an embodied reality if you're dialing in from Oshkosh or Pinehurst, North Carolina, or Salt Lake City, which is, or Kribi, Cameroon, where we have like 5 or 6 people dialing in. So I think that we're all gonna struggle with that. But getting back to the preaching, I think about the bishop's model for homiletic preaching, which fulfilled in your hearing, which is an older document, but I think really just a magnificent document. My preaching professor, William Skudlaric, at St. John's, was instrumental in writing it, that the nature of the homiletic task is to intersect the preacher, the text, and the community. And how do you do that? How do you speak to the particularity of this community in this time and place, this preacher who brings the whole world, all the lenses that make up this preacher, and the text, which is always new and always fresh? I mean, we really risk something when we turn, as lovely as it might be to spit out, a thoughtful narrative. It's not going to bring that kind of particularity. Back in the winter during Metro Surge, well, I was participating in activism, and I was seeing, firsthand we could not have avoided. If I had avoided all of that with some pithy narrative from, ChatGPT or another source, I would have done such a disservice to the people I serve, So I don't know, just raising more questions than answers, but I think that's the task of our generation, right? Is to continue to grapple with the question of our humanity and our call and our particularity. I'm kind of doing my wrap-up thought there, but Jayme, do you have any more questions? Because I know you have a special series of questions that we usually end with, and of course, I'm dying to hear what Ricky Manalo has to say about those.
So, Father
I'm not
Ricky,
sure.
this is what's happening. Now that Stephen Colbert has taken the Colbert Questionnaire, I'm not sure that it still exists, but we have what we call our Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire, which allows us to get to know our guests a little more deeply. And so today we have our Cutting Edge Catholics Questionnaire AI edition. If you're game for it, it's simply saying the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear a question, and it allows us to be able to better to better know you as a person and how it is that you think about certain issues. Are you ready for that?
I am gained, but scared too, but gained.
There you go. There you go. Here we go. 12 questions. The first question, Father Ricky, is your favorite scripture passage for the AI age?
The moment in Emmaus when all of a sudden he vanished from their sight at the end, because when you look at the Greek, it's not that he really vanished. The Greek translates to he was made invisible. So in other words, Christ was still there, but that whole journey in Emmaus, they did not recognize him. But they did recognize him at the breaking of the bread. So why AI? Because liturgy, as we've been talking about, brings us back together again as human bodies, at least at this stage. It brings us back. And so the gifts of our tradition, right, our sacramental tradition, is more about keeping that humanity through ritual and being able to see, particularly in AI, deep fakes, misinformation, liturgies and our own tradition is going to keep us grounded, I think, in those areas.
Yeah. Father Ricky, one technology you cannot live without.
Right now, ChatGPT and Claude, I'm going to put large language models together.
One technology you wish would disappear?
I'm a big user of Facebook, and sometimes I also see the evil of it. So if it were to go, I wouldn't actually complain.
What about, Father Ricky, your favorite science fiction book or film?
Oh, wow. I always liked Minority Report, Steven Spielberg's, because it's just a well-made film,
AI, hopeful or dangerous?
Both. Yeah, I'm in the middle. I'm in the middle group. I'm also my Chinese heritage. I'm a quarter Chinese. I'm always thinking things of yin yang. So whenever you ask me any questions like that, I'll always somehow find the middle.
Father Ricky, would you let AI write a homily draft?
Yeah, as a draft, but not right away. I still want to generate my own thoughts. But yeah, a draft, why not? After when I'm ready. Second stage.
The most human thing about liturgy, Father Ricky?
Oh, hearing people breathe before a song is about to be communally sung, and smelling in a good way. Breathing, smelling, keeping us grounded in the embodiment acts of worship.
Will AI ever compose sacred music with soul, Father Ricky?
Oh, wow. I think this is getting into a deeper, I can't do this quickly, because what we call soul, social scientists might call consciousness. Are they self-aware of themselves? At this stage, I don't see that, because our own heritage, Christian heritage of how we define soul, that also needs updating, by the way. I guess using that category, it can't be restricted within that category. So I'd say no.
One word describing Leo XIV.
Refreshing. No. Needed. Needed.
The biggest ethical threat from AI, Father Ricky.
I think losing the acceleration. We're accelerating so fast that we lose the opportunity to not consider what the deeper, more generative, and more human issues that are at stake.
2 final questions. The biggest possible benefit from AI?
Wow. Medical, I'd say, would be first, because I see a lot of those promises already. But I also want to, of course, connect that to, I would hope, a deeper faith life.
And finally, Father Ricky, what gives you hope for the future?
Gosh, I don't know why Pope Leo came to my mind. I guess, I think he's awesome. He's needed. Everything just connects. His background, I love, he's American. His calculated responses to certain world leaders, his intentionality to continue what Pope Francis has done, and the fact he's going to be here for a while. So that just gives me hope. I want to believe he's going to be here for a while, but he's relatively young.
Thank you, Father Ricky. As Stephen Colbert was always so fond of saying, now you are known, right? Father Ricky, we've come to the time in our conversation when we typically start thinking about final words that we'd like to share with our listeners and viewers. If you don't mind, I'll jump in and share a few thoughts first, and then I'll kick it over to Reverend Trish to be able to share some final words, and then we'll give you the last word as we close out today. I just want to say, Father Ricky, what a delight to connect with you all these years later. I never imagined in the 1990s when I first met you at Ellicott City that our paths would still somehow be crossing in and out all these years later, but in even more fascinating ways. Yes. Back then, you were showing me in your room the various music composing, the liturgical composing technology that you had at that time. And to see you now exploring other technologies, especially AI, and taking your learnings to the Vatican and bringing from the Vatican what it is you've learned back to us. And now just the timely nature of this conversation in light of yesterday's release of Magnifica Humanitas, it just could not have been better ordained by the Spirit at work. So I just want to thank you for all that you continue to do for liturgy, for liturgical music, and now for the thought that you're wrapping around artificial intelligence and what that means for us as people of faith. So I bow my head in your direction, Father Ricky. What a delight to be connected with you. And I love you deeply, and I can't wait to see where the Spirit continues to lead and guide you. Reverend Trish?
All of that. I'm really grateful, Ricky, that you came on. We are in a tender dance in our inclusive Catholic movement with a lot of different people in the Roman Catholic world, and yet so many of us love our family of origin, are willing to critique it, are willing to ask questions, but still deeply care. And like you, I'm finding Pope Leo's voice just so essential in our age, and I'm deeply grateful for his work, and I'm grateful for how you're able to help us more broadly understand these documents. The piece we didn't talk about, and perhaps it's for another time or another guest, is that there's a beautiful affirmation of the role of women in the document, and yet it is in my social media circles getting blasted because we continue to long for the institution to look at its own decisions around the marginalized and how they're enfranchised in the institution, that the credibility of that voice is always undermined, all these other wonderful things. And then the way it's undermined. So that's on my heart and mind today. I also have to go on the record that, yes, we did sing a Ricky Manalo song at my ordination as well, by the waking of our hearts, complete with liturgical dancers. So lest Jayme be the only fanboy, fangirl out there. Just really grateful for you to come on. And I'm eager to have you come back, Ricky, because I also want to talk about this whole thing about polarization. It's such a serious issue in our culture at large. It's become a huge issue in the churches, and so I'm hoping that we'll get on your calendar again. But our guest always gets the last word. So we'll now turn it over to you with anything you'd like to add or say or amplify as we begin to close out our time together.
Just a deep appreciation to both of you, really, and I guess so appreciate your community and what you bring to me, reminding me of the larger Catholicity of our faiths and the unity, and actually more unity that we share than than I think most people might presume. But dear God, the expansiveness and the continued prophecy that you bring into that, like you just mentioned with women ordination, deeply appreciative of that. If there's one wish I have for people who are listening, learn more, about AI. Read this encyclical; it's really good. But read other resources. The UN came up with the wonderful guidelines of AI. Begin to become more fluent in some of the languages because it's going fast. I don't want to suggest that you have to be part and parcel of that accelerated race, but you ought to be, I would hope, a little bit more acclimated so that when issues do emerge, and they will continue to emerge, you'll have some kind of foundation and position to be able to reflect upon the extent to which that affects your faith.
Thank you, Father Ricky Manalo, Paulist priest and liturgical composer and theologian. Our listeners can learn more at rickymanalo.org/faithmeetsai and catholicfaithai.org. Thank you for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jayme Matthias.
And I'm Reverend Trish Sullivan-Vani.
Let's go boldly into the future.
Thank you for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. Keep the faith.